Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby says that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are meeting with the negotiating team working on a new agreement between Israel and Hamas that will lead to a ceasefire, the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza, and in his words, provide relief for Palestinians. John Kirby says the 6 hostages whose bodies were found in tunnels under Rafah this past weekend, including an Israeli American, were executed. Hamas is responsible. They will pay for their actions, and the murderers express the urgency of reaching a deal. The Pentagon says the 2 U.S. Marines assaulted on a street in a port city in Turkey by a group of men and women connected to a nationalist party are safe and not harmed, and the Marines' professionalism in not escalating the situation is commendable. Turkey says arrests have been made. Russia hits a military academy and nearby hospital in a city in eastern Ukraine with ballistic missiles, killing at least 50, wounding at least 200. Russian President Vladimir Putin visits Mongolia but is not arrested under an international criminal court warrant for war crimes. In the U.S., President Joe Biden highlights how his Investing in America agenda is affecting the lives of Americans. It's including the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and Inflation Reduction Act. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump talks about communists and fascists as labels for political candidates during a podcast with an influencer. Harris Wall's Democratic presidential campaign launches a reproductive rights bus tour in Donald Trump's hometown, Palm Beach, Florida. And a judge rules in a lawsuit by the estate of Isaac Hayes that challenges Donald Trump's use of the 1966 song Hold On, I'm Coming, co-written by Isaac Hayes. From the Associated Press, large protests continued in Tel Aviv, Israel, for a third consecutive night Tuesday, as hundreds took to the street to call on the government to reach a ceasefire deal that would bring home the remaining hostages held in Gaza. The protests have come after the Israeli military said 6 hostages were killed by their captors in Gaza just as troops were closing in on their location. Many Israelis blame Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the mounting number of dead hostages and are calling for a ceasefire agreement to free the remaining hostages. Meanwhile, the U.S. says it is working on a new ceasefire and hostage deal proposal with its Egyptian and Qatari counterparts, and the United Nations Security Council plans to convene on Wednesday to discuss the war. That was from Associated Press. John Kirby, the White House National Security Communications Advisor, held a virtual audio news conference.
As you all know, on Saturday, in a tunnel in Gaza, Israeli forces recovered 6 bodies of hostages that were held by Hamas, including an American citizen, Hersh Goldberg-Polin. He and 5 others were executed. Hamas is responsible for their deaths. And as the president said, Hamas leaders will pay for their crimes. As you know, the president also had a chance to speak with Hersh's parents, John and Rachel, and as did the vice president, and they grieve with them and with all the families of everyone killed. Yesterday, the president and vice president had a chance to meet in the White House Situation Room with the U.S. hostage deal negotiation team to talk about next steps on our ongoing effort to secure the release of the hostages and to hold Hamas leaders fully accountable. As for the status of those talks, over the past couple of days, we've heard a lot from Israel, we've heard some from Hamas, and we continue to consult with our co-mediators, Qatar and Egypt. Just again, to restate it, we're working on a proposal that will secure the release of the remaining hostages and will include massive and immediate relief for the people of Gaza and also result in a stoppage of the fighting. Now, I've seen some press reporting out there about take it or leave it and final proposal and text this and text that. All I'm telling you is our team is still working on trying to get this to closure, to try to conclude a deal that achieves all those 3 things. And I'm sure you're all curious as to what that proposal says and what's in it. And I'm sure you're also not going to be surprised by the fact that I'm not going to get into that detail. What I can tell you is we are still actively working on this. We are still in constant consultations with Qatar, Egypt, and Israel. And of course, Qatar and Egypt are in touch with Hamas. And we're going to do what we can to get it done. I can't tell you what the timeline looks like. I can't tell you if we get it done exactly what every little paragraph and context of the final proposal would look like. All I can tell you is those are the three goals. And that's what we're still driving at, and we're still actively engaged in the effort. The president himself is personally involved in working with our team and in working with leaders around the world to secure this deal, and that's what we're focused on. And the killing over the weekend just underscores the sense of urgency that we have to have in order to get it to closure.
John Kirby, White House National Security spokesperson, opening up a virtual audio news conference. Story from ABC News. The Justice Department unsealed charges Tuesday targeting multiple senior members of Hamas's leadership for their alleged involvement in the kidnapping and murdering of Americans during the terror group's October 7th attack on Israel. The criminal complaint, unsealed in the Southern District of New York, names 6 members of Hamas's leadership structure and details extensively their terrorist activities on behalf of the group. That was from ABC News. President Joe Biden spoke to reporters briefly as he was leaving the White House on Monday. He was asked whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was doing enough to reach a ceasefire and hostage deal with Hamas. The president said no.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
And today, during the White House briefing, the press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked more about what the president said.
What did the president mean when he said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't doing enough to reach a hostage and ceasefire deal?
So here's what I'll say. He was asked a question by a colleague, a direct question, and he answered it. What I will say, I think more broadly, which is important to note, and the president said this in his statement over the weekend, is that make no mistake about it, Hamas leaders are going to pay for these crimes. And he and his team, for sure, will keep working around the clock to get this hostage deal done. And this is a president that has been pretty clear about that. He's spoken about making sure that we get this hostage deal done. He's met with the hostage families, all of them. We know that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is going to have a conversation with the American hostages this week. And so this is something that we are working again around the clock, 24/7. This is something his team is really steadfast, making sure that they're continue to be focused on this. And look, our teams are in constant conversation with the Israeli government on all levels on a daily basis. And I think that's important to note as well. But we will make no mistake as to who is responsible for this, and this is Hamas leaders.
Specifically to my question, what did the president mean that Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing enough?
I don't have anything more to add. The president was asked a direct question. He answered that question. What I can say is that, what I can say is this, is that we have made it very clear. The president over the weekend made it very, very clear as to who is responsible. It is devastating. The heinous acts that we have seen by Hamas is devastating. And those 6 hostages, their families are grieving. The president was very clear about that in his statement over the weekend, and he's going to continue to work around the clock. And that's the focus of the president and this administration.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre during today's White House news conference. The U.S. House and Senate are not in session this week. The summer recess goes another week. But during today's House pro forma session, when there's no legislative business conducted, the opening prayer was delivered by Rabbi Hannah Spiro of Hill Havara, Washington, D.C.
Divine Judge, source of all life, may this grief we feel, this rage we feel, each time a beautiful young soul is taken, serve some purpose. Not the cruelty of what they went through, not their senseless deaths. For these horrors, there is no possible silver lining. But may our grief, our rage, our intrusive thoughts get us somewhere that we need to be. to an insistence that the killing ends, to a clarity that peace and justice must go hand in hand. As it says in Psalm 85, loving kindness and truth will meet. Justice and peace will kiss. May every single person on this sacred earth live to see that day. And let us say, Amen.
Rabbi Hannah Spiro of Hill Havarah, Washington, D.C., giving the opening prayer at today's U.S. House pro forma session. Straight from the Washington Post, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff is scheduled to speak at a vigil Tuesday night in Washington for the 6 hostages taken from Israel on October 7th, whose bodies were recovered in Gaza on Saturday. Emhoff will speak at Adas Israel Congregation, according to a flyer from the organization. Emhoff, who is Jewish, has repeatedly spoken out about anti-Semitism and the violence in the Middle East. That was from the Washington Post. And from Politico Europe, out of London, Benjamin Netanyahu lambasted Britain's shameful, in quotes, decision to suspend the sale of some arms components used by Israeli forces in Gaza. United Kingdom Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced Monday that 30 licenses, including parts for fighter planes, helicopters, and drones, would be put on hold immediately after a review concluded there is a real risk weapons could be used in violation of international humanitarian law. In a strongly worded statement from the Netanyahu office Tuesday, the Israeli Prime Minister's team said Britain's shameful decision will not change Israel's determination to defeat Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization that savagely murdered 1,200 people on October 7th, including 14 British citizens, and drawing parallels with the United Kingdom's Second World War fight against Nazi Germany. The Israeli government added, instead of standing with Israel, a fellow democracy defending itself against barbarism, Britain's misguided decision will only embolden Hamas. That was from Politico Europe. Here is the British Secretary Lammy in the House of Commons on Monday.
It is this government's legal duty to review export licenses. Criteria 2C of the Strategic Export Licensing Criteria states that the government will not issue export licenses if there is a clear risk that the items might be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian law. It is with regret that I inform the House today the assessment I have received leaves me unable to conclude anything other than that for certain UK arms exports to Israel, there does exist a clear risk that might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. I have informed my right honourable friend, the Business and Trade Secretary, and he is therefore today announcing the suspension of around 30 from a total of approximately 350 to Israel as required under the Export Controls Act. These include equipment that we assess is for use in the current conflict in Gaza, such as important components which go into military aircraft, including fighter aircraft, helicopters and drones, as well as items which facilitate ground targeting. And for transparency, this government is publishing a summary of our assessment.
The British Foreign Secretary David Lammy in the House of Commons in London on Monday. This is Washington Today. From the New York Times, the Turkish authorities said they had detained 15 members of a nationalist youth organization in connection with the assault of 2 U.S. Marines stationed in a port city in western Turkey on Monday. Video posted on social media and verified by the news agency Storyful appeared to show the attack on the Marines. The footage shows a group of young men crowding around a man, restraining him and attempting to put a sack over his head while another man tries to intervene and push members of the group away. People could be heard chanting "Yankee, go home" in English in the footage. That was part of the story from the New York Times. Pat Ryder, the Pentagon press secretary, spoke about this incident at today's Pentagon news conference.
I wanted to ask about the 2 Marines who were assaulted in Turkey. If you could give us an update on their condition and speak in general about their reaction to the assault, not escalating it into something bigger, and what sort of impact it might have on future shore leave or future port visits in Turkey.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. So first of all, the 2 Marines are safe They were aided by other Marines in the area and subsequently taken to a local hospital for evaluation as a precaution, but were not injured. And they have subsequently returned to the USS Wasp. I can tell you that local Izmir police and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service are cooperating in an investigation of the incident. No Marines have been detained by authorities, and those involved are cooperating with investigators. In terms of the reaction of the Marines, certainly very proud of the professionalism of our service members, and most importantly, that they're safe. This is clearly a troubling incident. We are grateful for the support of the Turkish authorities who are looking into this, and I'll leave it there.
Will it have any residual impact, such as leave or the ability to go outside the gate at Incirlik?
That's really a question for the local commanders and U.S. EUCOM. Of course, every situation is judged based on its own merits. Force protection is always a consideration, and any commander has the authority to make those kinds of decisions. But again, I'd refer you to EUCOM for anything on that. Thank you.
Pentagon Press Secretary, Air Force Major General Pat Ryder at today's Pentagon News Conference. Senator Mark Wayne Mullin, Republican from Oklahoma, was interviewed by Fox News today about what happened in Turkey.
We can't support Israel enough. Unfortunately, what you have here is a division in our country that shouldn't exist, Brian. You have a party that is openly embracing Hamas and a terrorist organization that they are, and that's the Democrat Party. And this right here is what happens when our leader in the White House shows weakness, and instead of having peace through strength, they have a peace through appeasement. You end up having people that they don't respect and they don't fear the United States. This should never have happened. I commend the service members you're seeing right there on the video, because these individuals showed great restraint. I guarantee you, if these individuals wanted to cut it loose, they could cut it loose, and those individuals that were attacking them would be laying on the ground. You see the Marine being very calm. Even the one that ran in there didn't run in there throwing punches. He ran in there simply pushing people back. I guarantee you they had very strict orders when they left the ship to not engage. Otherwise, these individuals would be a much different story. And so while I hate to see this, I commend those Marines for the restraint that they had, but this should have never happened if we had a tougher commander-in-chief that stood solid with Israel and believed in peace through strength.
And remember, Erdogan has said he's tempted to put troops into Gaza to help out Hamas. Yeah. So you know exactly where the people stand. So let's talk about something. Go ahead.
What's the matter with that, Brian? As you know, there's a very important base that we have in Turkey that there's a partnership with, a very strategic, important base that we have. And at any given time, the disruption of that base could disrupt a lot of security measures we have in the region. So we still have to have a relationship with Erdogan and Turkey. And being a NATO ally, this stuff shouldn't happen. But this is why I go back to it, Brian, a weak leader causes this type of action to happen.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullin, Republican from Oklahoma, on Fox News today. Ukrainian authorities, writes BBC News, have said more than 50 people have been killed today, including soldiers, after Russian missiles struck Poltava, the deadliest single attack on a Ukrainian town or city this year. They said more than 200 people were wounded in the Ukrainian city when a military communications institute and nearby hospital were struck. Overnight, the Ukrainian military reported missiles were launched from occupied Crimea, about 26 miles away, which is within the missiles' range. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has asked the West for more air defense systems and long-range missiles. The White House has said more military aid would be sent to the country in the coming weeks. That was from BBC News. Back to John Kirby, the White House Strategic Communications Advisor, during his online virtual news conference.
Sadly, we have to yet again offer our deepest condolences to the people of Ukraine after another massive Russian strike, this time in a town called Poltava, which killed more than 40 people and wounded at least 180 others. Just another horrific reminder of the extent of Mr. Putin's brutality towards the people of Ukraine and the manner in which he's trying to punish them for his own invasion of that country. Going after critical infrastructure and trying to make it harder just for them to live and to pursue livelihoods. As President Biden has made clear, Our support for Ukraine remains unshakable, and we're going to continue to be focused on strengthening their military and their air defenses against these kinds of assaults and attacks. As you saw just 10 days ago, we announced yet another drawdown of military assistance. That included ammunition for the HIMARS systems, counter-drone equipment, munitions, Javelin anti-tank and anti-armor systems, and there will be more coming in coming weeks. So we're going to continue to stand by Ukraine as they try to defend themselves against these sorts of attacks.
White House spokesperson John Kirby. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba was interviewed on CNN today.
Ballistic missiles, educational facility, the city of Poltava, a large city in Ukraine. I actually come myself from Poltava region. My father is from there. So this geography is very familiar to me. And we had a very detailed briefing. And the main takeaway, the main lesson that I want everyone again to hear about, and we will not get tired of reminding of it, this is just another reason why delivery of air defense systems to Ukraine must be expedited.
Do you think if you had them there, this would have been intercepted?
Well, ballistic missiles are very difficult to intercept, and Poltava is in the east of Ukraine, so much closer to the Russian territory. According to what I know, the time range for the ballistic missiles to reach the target was very short, and the only way to intercept them was to have a Patriot system or SAMP-T air defense system, because they're the only one capable of intercepting ballistic missiles. So I don't know how many more tragedies like this have to occur for all promises to be fulfilled and for all new commitments to be made.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on CNN. From NBC News, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told NBC News on Tuesday that Kyiv is planning to indefinitely hold Russian territories it seized in a surprise incursion last month as it tries to force President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. Russian President Vladimir Putin, the story from AP, received a red carpet welcome to Mongolia on Tuesday as the country ignored calls to arrest him on an international warrant for alleged war crimes stemming from Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The trip, which concluded Tuesday night, was Putin's first to a member nation of the International Criminal Court since it issued the warrant in March 2023. Ahead of his visit, Ukraine urged Mongolia to hand Putin over to the court in The Hague, and the European Union expressed concern that Mongolia might not execute the warrant. That article from Associated Press, the foreign minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, spoke about this as well during his CNN interview.
We sent a very clear message ahead of the visit. It was ignored. We sent a very clear message after the visit began. It seems to be ignored as well. We will be talking inside of Ukraine and also with our partners on how Mongolia's respect towards its own international obligations under the Rome.
But you don't expect President Putin to be arrested while he's there?
Well, I do, but from everything I've seen so far, it seems to me that Mongolia decided to blatantly violate its obligations under the Rome Statute.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on CNN. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller was asked about this at his press conference today in Washington.
On Mongolia's failing to execute the ICC arrest warrant for Putin, what does it tell about the international rule of order and international criminal justice system?
So a few things. Number one, as we've said, we don't believe any country should give Putin a platform to promote his war of aggression against Ukraine. We do expect Mongolia to adhere to its commitment and its support for the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty and territorial integrity, and convey that those principles must be upheld around the world. We understand the position that Mongolia is in, sandwiched between two much larger neighbors, but we do think it's important that they continue to support the rule of law around the world. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Sean.
Were you disappointed they haven't arrested him?
As I said, we do very much understand the difficult position that Mongolia is in. It's a much smaller country between two neighbors. We look to continue to support Mongolia, but we do think it's important that they uphold their international obligations, and it's important that if they do communicate with Russia, that they make clear that they support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty.
It's not that small.
population-wise. I just mean in comparison. I mean in comparison to Russia and to China.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference at the State Department in Washington. In a Politico article, there's this. In a statement to Politico on Tuesday, a Mongolian government spokesperson said that the country finds itself in a position of energy dependence, rendering it difficult to handcuff Putin on the International Criminal Court warrant over war crimes in Ukraine. The spokesperson said Mongolia imports 95% of its petroleum products and over 20% of electricity from our immediate neighborhood, which have previously suffered interruption for technical reasons. This supply is critical to ensure our existence and that of our people. Mongolia has always maintained a policy of neutrality in all its diplomatic relations, as demonstrated in our statements of record to date. That was from Politico. And from Reuters, Brazil's top foreign policy advisor on Tuesday slammed the arrest warrant issued by Caracas for Venezuelan opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez as very concerning. It said there was a clear authoritarian escalation in the country. Other countries around the Americas, including the United States, Argentina, and Peru, also condemned the move. The Venezuelan Attorney General's office said on Monday that a court had issued an arrest warrant for Gonzalez, the opposition's erstwhile presidential candidate, accusing him of conspiracy and other crimes amid a dispute over whether he or President Nicolas Maduro won the July 28th election. That was the article from Reuters. This also came up at today's State Department briefing with spokesperson Matthew Miller, and he was asked about the news overnight that the U.S. has seized a jet plane used by President Maduro.
To Venezuela, I know that Kirby had some reaction earlier on the arrest warrant for the presidential candidate for Gaza. I wanted to ask you about that, but I also wanted to ask you about the seizure of President Maduro's airplane in the Dominican Republic. I'm sure that's a Department of Justice issue, but how do you see that in the current context of what's happening in Venezuela? Do you see this as an aspect of pressure at all? How do you expect Maduro to respond to this, and what are you looking for?
Yeah. So first, with respect to the first question. So we do condemn the arrest warrant for Edmundo Gonzalez for allegedly inciting violence. And I would note that it's not just the United States that's condemning this arrest warrant. It's countries in the region, Argentina, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, who have all condemned this unjustified arrest warrant. The arbitrary and politically motivated action demonstrates the extraordinary lengths to which Nicolas Maduro will go to try and maintain power following his attempt to steal the July 28th presidential election. And when it comes to the seizure of the plane, so what I would say is that the United States enforces its sanctions, and we're always going to enforce our sanctions. And so I would look at this less related to the election itself and more about the consequences that Maduro needs to continue to feel for his illegitimate and repressive anti-democratic actions. So those are actions for which he has been sanctioned. I'm not talking about with respect to the election, that we have sanctioned him over the years. So we have imposed sanctions on Maduro and his regime for their anti-democratic actions. Those long predate his most recent anti-democratic action, and we will continue to enforce those sanctions.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference. An article from The Guardian out of Great Britain begins, "Whatever happened to Christmas?" Frank Sinatra once asked. In Venezuela, the answer is that it has been brought forward to October. The country's strongman president, Nicolas Maduro, made the curious announcement that this year's festivities would begin in October on Monday in the midst of a political bleak midwinter for his crisis-stricken land. It's September, and it already feels like Christmas, so this year, as a way of paying tribute to you and thanking you, I'm going to decree that Christmas be brought forward to 1st of October, Maduro proclaimed during one of his frequent TV appearances. That was from The Guardian. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio, the American Enterprise Institute hosts a panel discussion on the final months heading into the 2024 presidential election. Hear the discussion live at noon Eastern on C-SPAN Radio. Listen on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Watch the ABC News presidential debate simulcast live on the C-SPAN networks, Tuesday, September 10th. As the candidates go head-to-head for their first debate since securing their party's nominations. Coverage begins with a preview show at 8 p.m., followed by the debate at 9 p.m. Eastern. The ABC News Presidential Debate Simulcast, live Tuesday, September 10th on the C-SPAN networks. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics. Powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's free, and wherever you find your podcasts. An article from Gray News. President Joe Biden hosted a kickoff of the Investing in America content series at the White House in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. The series is focused on various efforts the White House has made to encourage investments in manufacturing and jobs nationwide. A White House website devoted to the data lists points of interest throughout the country. The White House said investments of about $910 billion were supported by 4 laws passed by Congress during the Biden administration: the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, CHIPS for America, and the Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden is highlighting the accomplishments of his administration as he enters his final months in office. That was from Gray News. Here are some remarks from President Biden at this event.
4 years ago, when I came to office, the pandemic was raging and our economy was reeling. 4 years later, there's still more to do, but we had one of the most extraordinary periods of progress ever in history of this country. COVID no longer controls our lives. We've gone from economic crisis to the strongest economy in the world, literally. A record 16 million new jobs, record small business growth, record stock market, record high 401ks, wages are up, inflation is down, way down, and continuing to come down, and the smallest racial wealth gap in 20 years. I signed historic laws modernizing our infrastructure, bringing new chip factories back to the United States. We invented those chips. Lowering prescription drug prices and lowering them significantly. Fighting the climate crisis and gun violence, and so much more. But the bottom line is thousands of cities and towns all across America are seeing the great American comeback story, whether they're in red states or blue. All is part of what we're calling an Invest in America agenda. It's about seeking my commitment, speaking to the commitment I made as president, to be president for all Americans, whether you voted for me or not, whether you're in a red state or a blue state. And it's what's being highlighted. We're doing that today to highlight and show we're just getting started. In the weeks ahead, I'll talk with Americans all across the country about the progress we're seeing in their communities. Roads and bridges being built, lead pipes being removed from homes and schools, seniors saving significant money on prescription drug prices. And through the Investing in America agenda, we planted the seeds for a better future, and now those seeds are finally beginning to sprout. As a result, we're on the cusp of incredible progress and prosperity for the decade to come. That's why we're going to talk what we're going to talk about today. The story is about people whose lives are better in the future that we can be proud of. We're proving, once again, what I've always believed. We're the only nation in the world that's come out of every crisis we faced stronger than when we entered that crisis. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And nothing's beyond our capacity when we do it together.
President Joe Biden at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building next to the White House. A discussion with the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, and people from Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin joining remotely. The launch of the Investing in America content series. Washington Post has an article. A larger share of Americans now say they approve of the job President Joe Biden is doing, according to a Suffolk University USA Today survey fielded last week, about a month after he dropped out of the race for re-election. Tom Perez, the director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, was part of the White House press secretary's news conference today and got questions about this Investing in America initiative.
Is the purpose of this tour to promote policies that were already passed, to build public enthusiasm for the president's agenda? And obviously you're a political preacher who was a former DNC chair, and I don't want you to violate any rules. But is it a coincidence that the president is going to 2 critical blue wall swing states for the first stops on this tour?
Well, the first speaker today was Randall Woodfin, the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're not looking at red or blue. We're looking at red, white, and blue. If you look at where infrastructure dollars, if you frankly follow ARPA dollars, follow every funding stream, you can't disaggregate red states, blue states. The president has said repeatedly, and the vice president have said, we are the president and vice president for everyone. In my travels that I described, I've been to Oklahoma, I've been to Texas, I've been everywhere where we are seeing investments. And the purpose of this, and it kind of gets back to the most recent question here, is educating people about what has been accomplished. People have a right to know how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. And a big part of this tour is to educate folks that your library that didn't used to have high-speed internet, and I've been to one of those libraries, and it now has it. And by the way, libraries are workforce hubs in many communities because that's where people go to do interviews. That's where people who are, don't have a computer at home go to write their resumes and things of that nature. Educating people, I think it's a really important part of governance. It's a really important part of making people believe that government can work for them. And so that's what this tour is about.
And just the Wisconsin and Michigan being the first.
Well, again, Birmingham, Alabama was the first conversation he had.
Zoom and Air Force One landing.
Well, I think if you look at the president's travel and the vice president's travel over the course of this year, when there's a hurricane or a storm, a weather event in Iowa, we were on the phone with the governor of Iowa approving an emergency declaration overnight. Same thing in Texas and Oklahoma and elsewhere. Storms don't just go to blue states or red states. Storms go everywhere. And that's been the focus of the president, the vice president.
Tom Perez is director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs at today's White House news conference. On Wall Street, the Dow down 626, NASDAQ down 577, S&P down 119. Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, has done another podcast interview with an influencer, Lex Friedman, an MIT computer, AI, and robotics research scientist, who describes his podcast as conversations about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, love, and power. Here's part of the conversation where the two talked about Donald Trump calling Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, a communist, and some people calling him a fascist.
A lot of people listening to this, myself included, that doesn't think that Kamala is a communist.
Well, she's a Marxist.
Her father's a Marxist.
That's right.
And she's advocating.
It's a little unusual,
She's advocating for some policies that are towards the direction of democratic socialism, let's say. But there's a lot of people that kind of know the way government works, and they say, well, none of those policies are going to actually come to reality. It's just being used during the campaign to, groceries are too expensive, we need them cheaper, so let's talk about price controls, and that's never going to come to reality.
It could come to reality. Look, she came out with price control. It's been tried like 121 different times at different places over the years. And it's never worked once. It leads to communism. It leads to socialism. It leads to having no food on the shelves. And it leads to tremendous inflation.
It's
a bad idea.
Whenever we use terms like communism for her, and I don't know if you know this, but some people call you a fascist.
Yeah, they do. So I figure it's all right to call them a communist. Yeah, they call me a lot worse than I call them.
They do indeed. It's just sometimes...
It's interesting, though. They'll call me something that's terrible, and then I'll hit them back. And they'll say, isn't it terrible what Trump said? I said, well, wait a minute. They just called me. So I believe you have to fight fire with fire. I believe they're very evil people. These are evil people. We have an enemy from the outside, and we have an enemy from within. And in my opinion, the enemy from within are radical left lunatics. And I think you have to fight back.
Former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, on the podcast with Lex Friedman today. From TheHill.com, House Democrats have launched a probe into former President Trump's alleged acceptance of $10 million from the Egyptian government during his 2016 presidential campaign, as well as whether allies quashed a subsequent investigation into the matter. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, top Democrat on the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, sent a letter following reporting from the Washington Post that found the Egyptian government withdrew $10 million in funds shortly after Donald Trump made a last-minute injection of the same amount of his funds to his campaign in the last few days of the 2016 election. That was from The Hill. And out of Palm Beach, Florida, WPEC TV, a new bus tour to support Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential bid will begin this week in Boynton Beach, Florida. This bus tour is being used as a way to highlight the difference between the Democratic nominee's stance on reproductive rights versus those held by Donald Trump, whom they describe as playing a major role in the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The entire bus tour expected to make 50 stops across the country. That was WPEC TV reporting. Among the speakers today in Florida, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat of Florida.
Now, my friends, I ask you, what better place to kick off the Harris-Walz Reproductive Freedom Bus Tour than in Donald Trump's backyard? Sort of hoping that we would just pull the bus right up to Mar-a-Lago and actually be in his backyard. But we'll settle for this wonderful restaurant. I am so thrilled to help launch this Reproductive Freedom Harris-Walz Battle Bus Tour in Florida. Because right now in our state, thanks to Donald Trump and his MAGA buddies, we're dealing with the fallout of an extreme, life-threatening, near-total abortion ban. This law is so restrictive that it limits abortion access before many women even know they are pregnant. I did not find out that I was pregnant with our youngest child until I was 8 weeks pregnant. Thank God she is a healthy, thriving 21-year-old, beautiful girl today. But this Trump ban even threatens doctors with fines and prison time for providing care to their patients. Boo isn't even enough. Physicians and nurses are fleeing our state because of it. Well, this election, we can change that by voting for Amendment 4 on Florida's ballot to restore reproductive rights to Florida's Constitution. Because we're not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back. We're not going back. After Trump's assault on reproductive freedoms, voters in states across America, even red states like Kansas and Kentucky and Ohio, rejected extreme abortion bans at the ballot box. Now we need to follow in their footsteps to protect a woman's right to choose in Florida. Democrats pushed for it, but 20% of the people who signed the petition to get it on the ballot were Republicans. But my friends, you know who's not for it? Donald Trump. On Friday, he committed to voting no on Amendment 4, doubling down on what we already knew. You can't trust a damn word out of that liar's mouth, no matter what he says.
Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat from Florida, at the start of the Harris-Walz presidential campaign's Reproductive Freedom Bus Tour, kicked off in Palm Beach, Florida. Other speakers today there were Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, and Ana Navarro, Republican talk show host. The Harris-Walz campaign says that at future stops of the bus tour, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff and the Minnesota First Lady Gwen Walz will take part. From CNN, a federal judge has ruled former President Donald Trump and his campaign must pause on using the song "Hold On, I'm Coming." The decision came after the estate of the late R&B artist and songwriter Isaac Hayes sought an emergency injunction to stop the Trump campaign from using the song at campaign events, alleging the campaign does not have approval. Judge Thomas Thrash Jr. made the ruling from the bench in court in Atlanta, Georgia. The judge denied a motion by the Hayes estate to force the Trump campaign to take down any previously recorded uses of the song, reporting from CNN. Isaac Hayes III joined the lawyers outside the courthouse.
There was a lot of conversation today just about whether or not it was actively communicated to them to stop using the song. I think you guys tried to prove over and over that you've asked several times. Can you go through the steps in which you tried to get everyone's attention to stop using it and then the subsequent use over and over?
Yeah, so this has been a 4-year process. Initially in 2022,
right after the Uvalde mass shooting at the NRA convention in Houston, Donald Trump used "Hold On, I'm Coming." I made a tweet that I was not pleased with that. A cease and desist was sent at that point. Over the next 4 years, he continued to use the music. After the rally here in Atlanta, James and I had a conversation, said we really got to find a way to stop him from using the music, and this was the only means to be able to do that. He was also notified by BMI at a point 100 days ago to not play the song, but he continued to play the song multiple times after he was told not to. So that's copyright infringement, textbook copyright infringement. We are the copyright holders. A lot of artists are not often in this position to stand up for their copyrights because publishing companies typically own the rights to the music, but I always want to make sure that we are able to protect my father's legacy. My father lost the rights to his music a year before I was born. That music started to come back, so after 56 years, the last thing that we were going to do is sell our copyright, and we're going to defend and continue to gather more Isaac Hayes copyrights.
Isaac Hayes III outside the courthouse in Atlanta. Hold On, I'm Coming was written by his father, Isaac Hayes Jr., and David Porter in 1966. It was made famous by the duo Sam and Dave. Isaac Hayes Jr. died in 2008. Ronald Coleman, attorney for Donald Trump, also spoke to reporters today in Atlanta. He said the Trump campaign has already stopped using the song, but they will contest the request to have posted videos that contain the song brought down.
Most important to us at the moment was that the judge, in recognition of really important free speech and political speech interests, acknowledged that it would be an excessively broad use of his injunction power, which is prohibited by the federal rules as well as the United States Constitution, for him to have issued an order that would have resulted in the campaign being forced to take down videos. So we're very gratified about how it came out.
In fact, you had suggested that you believe there might be some political motivation to the timing of this request that videos come down. If you can talk about that.
Well, it's certainly conceivable. I think it's just as conceivable that the timing was used as a pressure point as much as being the result of frank political motivations. Everyone I've dealt with on the other side has been a complete gentleman.
You were playing fair use as analyzers, but that's kind of a slippery slope. What if it's not a local candidate or school candidate?
I think it's very important for us to understand that the fair use argument that we've been making is based on the way the video appears more or less in the background of the video. I'm sorry, that the song appears in the background of the video. We did, when alerted to the issue, get a license. We got a license because creators are entitled to be compensated for their work. We believe obviously, the campaign believes, and Mr. Trump believes in following the law. When the issue was brought to our attention, we got a license. In terms of fair use, though, that comes in at the video level. The idea that entire videos that have that music in the background should be taken down, that's where the fair use argument comes in. And I'd be happy to give a primer on fair use, but I don't think we're up for that today, especially.
Ronald Coleman, attorney for Donald Trump, outside the courthouse in Atlanta. A story from AP has this paragraph: a string of artists and their heirs have objected to Donald Trump using their songs during his events. After a Trump campaign rally in Bozeman, Montana last month featured a video of Celine Dion performing My Heart Will Go On, her team put out a statement saying the singer didn't endorse that use of her song and saying in no way is this use authorized. Ahead of the 2020 election, Bruce Springsteen, Rihanna, Phil Collins, Pharrell, John Fogerty, Neil Young, Eddie Grant, Panic at the Disco, R.E.M., and Guns N' Roses all objected to Donald Trump using their songs. That was from AP. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.